Hello students, welcome to EPG Patasala. I am Dr. K.R. Ram Mohan, Associate Professor and Head Department of Anthropology, Sikkim University. Today we are going to talk about a module on configuration and pattern, Kroeber and Benedict, from the paper Theories and Methods in Social and Cultural Anthropology. So before we go to this module, let us see some of the learning objectives of this topic on cultural configuration and cultural pattern. Students will be able to know the life history of Alfred Louis Kroeber. Students will also be able to know the life events of Ruth Fulton Benedict. And students will also be able to explain about the theoretical contributions of Albert Louis Kroeber. Students will be able to explain Ruth Benedict's pattern of culture. Lastly, students will be able to understand the concept of configurations of cultural growth. As students of anthropology, the whole idea of mostly cultural anthropology is centered around the concept of culture. That is why we have social and cultural anthropology. Mostly American anthropologists, they give more importance that culture is the main thing that which shapes our entire social behavior, and how we have been part of this society is based on given the culture. As you all know, that culture is the key concept of anthropology and central to all the subdisciplines of anthropology. If we look at the important branch in archaeology, we are trying to reconstruct the past historical culture, that how men lived from a materialistic point of view, for that matter. With the kind of artifacts that have been discovered, that we try to trace the ancient man's prehistoric culture, or even from a biological point of view, that how certain primates might have organized themselves. So in that sense, even it is, or even linguistic anthropology, which also tries to see how the interrelationship between language and culture, whether it is a product of culture or it's. So culture is the single unique attribute of human beings, or from a biological aspect, we can say Homo sapiens, we have this genus. To put it simply, culture is nothing but a way of life, or it is some kind of a design for our living. It is, we give examples that it is their culture, it is our culture, the way we dress, the way we speak, the way we eat, the way we sit, the way we, all kinds of etiquette, all kinds of things which all comes under the umbrella term of culture. So it is the basis of human life. Without, we cannot say that, culture is not devoid of human life. Though it rests on biology, but it is not entirely biological. In a sense that, many geneticists and human biologists says that culture is rooted in our biology. Whether it is being transmitted biologically or it is being learned and shared and has been integrated. This is somewhat we have to accept the fact that perhaps it could have some kind of a biological base, but it is not completely biological. So it encompasses the all aspects of psychological, rational, material, technological processes and products which are being manifested through various symbols in our society, the numerous symbols that we carry, and each society has its own symbols, it has its own ideas, it has its own ideals, rules and regulations to which govern our life or others' lives, or even the different kinds of patterns of thinking, how people think also depends upon given cultural setting or cultural makeup, or how we form our relations networks in terms of social networks, in terms of kinship, in terms of alliances. How do we do that? All this centers around the concept of culture. And the kind of material objects that we possess, we use, we try to put it in our daily life is also a kind of being part of the culture. Without all these things, our our survival is difficult, or it loses meaning, it loses no practicality. So in a sense that we can call it as the whole aspects or the whole elements of that which makes our life living as a whole can be put it as culture. Now, culture is not merely a loose or just fitting of all these parts. There is something beyond this. We cannot simply arrange one thing, one thing, one thing and say that, yes, this is culture. As students of anthropology, we need to look beyond these arrangement or the amalgamation of these parts. It is some kind of a holistic phenomena where we can say that the whole is greater than some of its parts. We are not saying that each part has its no meaning at all. Each part has its, or each unit has its own meaning. It has its own intrinsic value. It has its own way of dealing with things. But it is being integrated, it is being connected to the larger whole. The awesome complexity of culture cannot be explained merely by just investigating the different components of culture. Take one unit and we cannot simply say that, this we have to investigate. So, to put it, we have to say that culture is a coherent system or a coherent whole which is integrated, and it is not just the bits and pieces of traits or complexes of in any given society. So this integrated arrangement of parts of culture gives each culture its unique configuration. In a sense that what makes a particular society or its culture, in what way it is configured. What is its configuration? If we look at mechanically, if you look at any system, we try to see and we try to look into what and how does it configure it. In that sense, in that aspect, we can also see how a given culture or a given society is configured and how it is being manifested. So this configuration of culture with its systems of internal relationship is also called the pattern of culture. So when all the cultural components are being configured, and it gives some kind of a pattern which governs individual lives. So in this aspect, the approach or the perspective given by particularly by Kroeber says that the cultures are configured or configurations of cultural systems. Now, when we say that it is a coherent whole and which is unique in its configuration, which has its own internal mechanisms which are being internally related, we can see how the cultures are taken the route towards the growth, how cultures have grown and how cultures have changed from time to time. This explanation, which is not given by classical evolutionists or other approaches, that how cultures change and which leads to some kind of a configuration mechanism, which is an important understanding from Kroeber's point of view that cultures are configured in terms of a coherent whole. So these two aspects of configuration which leads to pattern, and Kroeber gives two types of patterns of culture. One is the basic or systemic pattern of culture, and the other one is the secondary pattern. So let us see what is this basic or systemic pattern of culture. This basic systemic pattern of culture is nothing but the long enduring cultural trait which do not change at all for a longer period of time, which is unchanged. For example, alphabets, which has never been changed, which has been there forever, or religion, the gods that people worship. It's a basic systemic pattern of culture. There is no change of God. God is God in a sense that a particular worship is worship for a longer period of time. And again, the secondary form of pattern of culture is, for example, let's say government. The pattern can be changed. One form of government of pattern can be changed for variety of reasons, for certain forces which have been applied, and that becomes a secondary pattern of culture. Says that this been patterned. Now, Kroeber was interested how certain patterns of thought process which have been taken place in different historical periods of time in different geographical regions. For example, in China, in India, and in Europe, they have different philosophy, different religion, different governments. This warrants some kind of a pattern was there. Indian philosophy has some kind of, Indian thinking has some kind of a pattern. Indian religion has some kind of a configuration of ideas, which perhaps may not be seen in other aspects of culture. So this gives more broader understanding that why a particular aspect or why particular geographical area or particular society has that kind of an aesthetics, that kind of ethics or that kind of ethos, which are basically centered around the configuration of the cultural traits of that particular given culture. So Kroeber has put into a position where that cultures are not just mere agglomeration of all these parts, but they have been configured of these elements, which gives us some kind of a meaningful existence and coherence, which can be understood only at a larger level. Taking this Kroeber's lineage of a cultural configuration, there is another important thinker in American anthropology is Ruth Benedict. She has the credit, she both Kroeber and Benedict are the products of Franz Boas, and she came out with says that each culture have certain patterns. It is further improvisation of this configuration thing, and she coined what we call culture pattern. And the famous books written by Benedict or Patterns of Culture, very important book, classical text in anthropology, which specifically deals about how a particular culture is being patterned, which governs the social life, and it also gives the pattern of social life. Benedict's understanding is that culture gives a certain psychological types of individuals. If we look at one particular culture, we can say that this particular group has one particular psychological type, or this is a set of psychological characteristics that people possess. We go to another society and we see that these people have this particular set of psychological aspects. So that means there is a close relationship between culture and psychology. So all the psychological systems are nothing but the pattern of a certain culture. Personality is being determined by culture. The ways of behavior are being determined as a community, as a whole, just because they are the products of one particular culture. So Benedict gives a beautiful ethnography of uh, two important societies in Americas. One is the Juni cultural group, and the other one is the Kwakital group. Benedict says that in this pattern, Juni individuals or Juni community has the Apollonian ethos. Apollyon, which is basically a Greek mythological figure, which says that this society has characteristics of Apollonian personality types. So what does this Apollonian personality types? There is community feeling, no individuality, passive, non-aggressive, no selfishness, no violence, and peace-loving people. So it shows that this Juni society is basically patterned within the concept of that Apollonian ethos, where all people possess the same kind of psychological category. It is not an individual psychological category here. It is a collective personality types. On the other hand, Kwakital are more violent, more expressive, more individualistic, more competitive, and hence they are in a more state of chaos. There is a lot of competition between them. Now, why a particular area, when these two groups are there, we're living close, have two different types of cultural or personality types, and why and how they are patterned like that? That gives some kind of an explanation that there is no cultural universals. Everything is unique in its own place. When the set of people are behaving like this, on the other hand, the other set of people are behaving like that, it does inform to an anthropologist that there is something unique about this culture and there is something unique about this culture, which where Benedict points out and says that this is nothing but they have been patterned to behave in terms of their enculturation process. She has gone beyond and studied the concept of how Japanese society has been patterned. And she has given a wonderful book titled called The Chrysanthemum and the Sword. A chrysanthemum is a nice flower, on the other hand, it is a sword, a big sword. And with this ethnographic work, which is based on all the documents which she collected from Japan, gave a new concept called national character. She says that loosely says that Japanese societies have this kind of a national character where there is too much of competition among themselves, which perhaps is basically ingrained in their personality types. And how each passage of rites are being performed in their whole lifespan. There is a severe cut-through competition for right from childhood to adolescence. So with this, Benedict comes out and says that the ethos are being developed because of the patterns that have been emerged within a particular culture, which give rise to a different set of qualities and cultural attributes uh, of a given culture that we are trying to study. And this new understanding has opened up that cultural configuration and cultural patterns give certain personality types, which we can collectively wholly and can say that yes, this particular people have this kind of behavioral aspects and this particular group have this particular. That is how their whole ethos have been designed, and which has been in place for a longer period of time. So this configuration concept and pattern concept can be understood in terms of how these two goes in parallel, and one of a wider understanding of that the dyadic relationship between culture and personality. As we have discussed something about the both the concepts of culture configuration and the culture pattern, let us see what are the basic points which have emerged out of this lecture. As you all know, and as we are well aware, that mostly it is repetitive in anthropological discourse, is that culture is the key concept in this discipline, and it is all central to all the subdivisions. Well, culture is unique to all the groups. Culture is, though it has certain biological uh, roots, but it is not entirely biological. It has various other dimensions. When we say that culture is made up of certain parts, and each part perhaps it has its own unique intrinsic value, but unless it is being combined, unless it is being put it as a whole, only then it gives a meaningful existence to a particular society. And that is how the internal relationships, we call it as configuration and pattern of culture. One of the pioneers of in this school of thought, which gives arrows both configuration and pattern of culture, is Kroeber, which his famous publication is called Configuration of Culture, which carries a very elaborate description of the growth and spread of cultures, also from a diffusionist point of view. How particular cultures have grown over a period of time, and how cultures have spread to other parts of societies. And in this work, we can see that patterns are basically of two types. One is the systemic pattern, and the second one is the secondary pattern. In the systemic pattern, we can notice that unchangeable cultural elements like religion, like language, and the secondary patterns which are likely to be changed over a period of time, which can go certain modifications according to the need and hour of that particular situation, which he calls as secondary pattern. In that sense, we can see that these two go together, that the systemic and the secondary pattern of culture has been there. Another important anthropological thinker we have seen is that Ruth Benedict's understanding of how cultures are patterned, and she gave this uh, issue of or concept called patterns of culture, which has been an improvisation of Kroeber's configuration of culture. How a particular culture gives rise to particular personality types, and how people are being patterned their social behavior according to that particular pattern of culture. And she gives these two classical examples of Apollinian and Dionysian ethos from both Juni and Kwakitul cultural groups. In that sense, we can come to an understanding that patterns of culture and configuration of cultures are unique in its own, that all cultures cannot be understood in one umbrella term. We cannot put all cultures in one umbrella and all cultures are in that big umbrella. So all cultures are unique, all cultures are specific in its own historicity, in its own pattern, in its own configuration. And how does it produce these personality types are being given by these ethnographic works by both Kroeber and Benedict, which gives a wider understanding of that collective behavior are being products of unique cultural types. Thank you.